Welcome to Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. Here we explore the training and development of America's leaders and the application of air power and the profession of arms. The views expressed are those of the hosts and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, Department of Defense, or the U.S. government. The mention of companies by name is solely for the purpose of discussion and should not be implied as endorsement.
Welcome back to another episode of Commission Ed, the Air Force Officer Podcast. I am Colin Slade.
And I'm Reed Gann, and we're your hosts for Commission Ed.
You know, Reed, we've talked a lot about the process of getting into the different commissioning sources. We've talked about how to get to officer training school into Air Force ROTC. And we've even had some help with the Air Force Academy, which both you and I are admittedly not the experts on, right?
Yeah, it was really great to have Dave Rowe come on and give us some insight, but you and I were both noticing that the role of the Admissions Liaison Officer was highlighted quite a bit in his discussion, and we really wanted to get some more details on what that role is and what we could learn more about the admissions process at USAFA.
Yeah, so I reached out to the admissions office at the Air Force Academy, and they put me in touch with, shall we say, the SME of all SMEs for the admissions process for USAFA. Lieutenant Colonel Brian Zajick is an admissions liaison officer in ALO, and you'll hear in this interview, he is just a wealth of knowledge and understanding about not just the admissions process, but you'll hear in the discussion that he's got some really important nuggets of officer development and leadership that we are so excited to share with you all.
Absolutely. Everybody prep yourself. You got some knowledge bombs coming your way. There's some good stuff.
Yeah. So with that, we'll turn it over to Lieutenant Colonel Brian Zajick. Today we are joined by Lieutenant Colonel Brian Zajick. We're excited to have you on the show, sir. Why don't you introduce yourself for a little bit and give us all an idea of who you are, where you're from, what your experience was getting into the Air Force, what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Colin. I appreciate the invitation. So, like I said a little earlier, I kind of binged some of your podcasts. So,
thank you for that. Is it because your Netflix wasn't working, or what's going on?
Yeah, we could talk about Netflix Oconus if you want later, but yeah, no, the Netflix was working fine. So I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force Reserve. I graduated from the University of Virginia ROTC in 2000, so I attended 1996 to 2000. So my junior year of high school, this is a funny story. My junior year of high school, Pershing Zone, which is the Army Jazz Band out of Washington, D.C., came down to Richmond, Virginia, where I went to high school. And my band director chose two of us to solo with the jazz band. And lo and behold, I got chosen, in which that actually put me with them for about a week, for about an hour a day.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was amazing, because I really wanted to be in the band. And so I was talking to one of the saxophone players. And he goes, you're really good. You should think about joining the military as a band member. And I go, is that possible? And he said, yeah, it's so hard nowadays to make money being a musician, and you get paid to play your instrument, and you don't have to join ASCAP because that's expensive, which is the union, and you get to travel all around the world. And I was like, well, that's what I want to do. And I was actually pretty set on that from that point on, to join the military and be in the band. And so, you know how when the recruiters come to the lunchrooms, I went up to every single recruiter, the Marine Corps recruiter, the Army recruiter, the Air Force recruiter. I said, how do I join to be in the band? And they're like, oh, this is what you need to do. And they were asking about my scales and this and that, because they didn't really know what they were talking about. They were asking. And so I was like, well, let's everybody come to my house. So I invited all the recruiters to my house at different times. Now, my father, let me go back a little further. So I was adopted at 18 months old from Korea, so I'm a naturalized citizen. And before I was adopted, my father was in the Air Force, got to the rank of E5 during the Vietnam period. He never actually was in combat. He was a triple nickel, or what we call a CB in the Air Force nowadays. So anyway, he never pushed me at all. I knew nothing about the Air Force because I wasn't born yet, nor was I around when it was the Air Force. So these recruiters started showing up at my door, and they were all the non-prior service recruiters. And he started going, "Who's at the door?" And the first one that came was the Marine Corps recruiter, and he just stood at the front door. And I was like, "Oh, hey, Dad, the Marine Corps recruiter's here." He's like, "That guy is not coming in this house." And so he actually would not let the Marine Corps recruiter in the house. I was like, "I just want to talk to him and join the band." And he was like, "No, you're not. He's not coming to this house." So that didn't work. So I ended up canceling the rest of them. He goes, "If you're going to be in the band, you're going to be a commissioned officer." And I didn't know anything about. I was like, "What's a commission?" So he said, "If you're going to be in the military, you got to go to college, and you're going to be commissioned." So my dream school was University of Virginia, but at the same time, I started the Air Force Academy application a little bit, but I did what was called early decision at University of Virginia. And so early decision meant a binding contract. So I suspended everything else, even though I was in the process for the academy and those types of things. So went to University of Virginia with a 4-year Type 2 Air Force ROTC scholarship. And back in the day, you actually got your major on your scholarship. So when I got mine, it said, and this was 1996 for anybody that wants to know the year, said Brian Zajick, Type 2 Air Force ROTC scholarship in environmental sciences engineering. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. So I had to call and, find out that it was actually a subset of civil engineering. And then I was like, how do I change it to music? But they're like, you can't do that. It's not a technical measure. So I changed it to computer science, thinking I would use computer science and music together to join the band. Okay, so fast forward to when I started ROTC, walked in the first day with my father, who was an E5 at one point, and the professor of air science walks in, a full bird colonel. Everybody stands up, and my dad's like, stand up. And I was like, for what? Who is this? And so, because I didn't know. I didn't know rank or anything. I knew absolutely nothing. So I stood up. I was like, all right, I'll stand up for this guy. That's no big deal. And I thought that day I was going in as a private, because I didn't know. I thought you went from private to colonel. I didn't know anything about rank around the enlisted and officer. So loved all of my ROTC time. Great group of people. I entered with 35 contract cadets, and only 6 of us survived 4 years. So we had a lot more success in college scholarship program than the high school scholarship program. And then my junior year, when they did the selections for pilot and navigator training, I actually was offered a navigator slot, and I turned it down. That was never my intent. I actually wanted to be in the band, which that got dashed my first year when I finally understood the rank structure and officer enlisted, and found out that all the band members were enlisted and had performance master's degree in their instrument. And the only commissioned officers in the band were the conductors. And those conductors had like 20 to 30 years of experience, and they came in as second lieutenants. So I changed over to computer science and started down the path of trying to be a 33 Sierra, which is at the time was called a communications information systems officer. So I commissioned as 33 Sierra, which is now what's called a 17 Delta cyber warfare officer. However, I did a brief pit stop for a year at my university. I stayed as a local gold bar recruiter, which was a program that allowed newly minted second lieutenants to stay at an ROTC detachment and help recruit for AFROTC. So I did that for a year, and then I went on to basic comm officer training at Keesler Air Force Base, which happened to be right when September 11th hit. 4.5 months at basic comm officer training. Then I went off to Peterson Air Force Base, and I was in what was called the Network Operations Security Center. So we were the operators for the communications field for Air Force Space Command. That was my first taste of real leadership. I know you guys talk about getting thrust into leadership and so forth. Second lieutenant, I was called a crew commander. I didn't really have anybody underneath me. But so my boss was a major. His name's Major Holofield. I'll send this to him because I still talk to him, but so he can listen to this. But the day I pinned first lieutenant on, he calls me in his office. And back then, the comm career field had something called the Ace Lieutenant program, where the comm career field is so big you were moved around because we had so many different things that we could do, air traffic control and landing, satellite systems, telephone systems, all that stuff. So they would try to move you around every 3 months so you get a good feel in the first 2 years of what you were doing. But since I came in after a year, I was not put in the ACE program. And so when I came on first lieutenant, Major Holofield called me in his office, put all these 6-part folders down in front of him and goes, "You deal with the ACE lieutenant." And so, again, listening to some of your old podcasts, peer leadership is the toughest. They were all the same age as me. Some of them were older than me because they were prior. And I had 11 second lieutenants that would ask me for leave. They would ask me for what to do if they weren't doing something properly. If they got in trouble, I had to deal with it. So it was great getting thrust into that mentorship and leadership experience right there, right off the bat. So then I pinned captain on right before I left Colorado, and amazingly, I got non-volunteered to a small listening outpost in England, RAF Croughton. And a lot of people know RAF Mildenhall and RAF Lakenheath. Those are the two bigger bases. For anybody older listening, RAF Croughton was the satellite site to RAF Upper Hayford. And I came in as the base support flight commander, so I dealt with telephones and the base network control center and those type of things. What was interesting about going from a headquarters base to a small base like Croughton, there were about 350 active duty. That's it. And there were about 18 officers on the whole base. So my best story there was, I think it was about 3 or 4 months in, I get called from the orderly room because my boss had gone away. He was another Major George Lamont. And again, I'm going to send this to him because I still talk to him as well. And the orderly room calls and says, "Hey, sir, you need to come and sign your orders." And I was like, "Oh, I'm already here." He's like, No. You need to sign your G Series orders for 2 days."
You're like, "What's that?"
Yeah, I don't know why I would need to do that. And for anybody listening, G Series orders is command authority orders. And they said, "Well, you're the highest ranking line officer on the base for the next 2 days." And I was like, "Oh my gosh." And so I was like, okay. And when I went over, I signed up for 2 days, and then I went and hid under my desk for 2 days. And so I was, as the captain, I was the base commander for 2 days, which was the strange, I was a 4-year, 4-month captain. And so, yeah, that's always my story about how you get thrust into leadership so quickly in the military, which is amazing, but that's what happened. So 2007, so I was there for a couple of years, deployed to Iraq with the Army. Very interesting, the joint world there. And then 2007, there was a RIF. So there was a reduction in force in the Air Force and in the Navy. They were trying to drop the amount of military members in the Air Force and the Navy and actually bring about 2 divisions more into the Army based on the Iraq war conflict and Afghanistan at the time. So they were offering a volunteer separation bonus for anybody that wanted to get out on a volunteer basis, and almost everybody that was eligible at my base took it. So I took it because my wife is an IT professional as well, and she was sitting as a GS7 as the squadron commander secretary, and she wanted to get back in the IT field. So I was like, "Look, if you can find a job, I'll take the volunteer separation bonus. We won't worry about the RIF board. We'll go from there." And she found a job in 3 days at Ramstein Air Base as a contractor. So took the thing, and she moved, and then I followed her about 6 months later. But when I went to my TAP class, which is Transition Assistance Program, and that's the mentorship program they give every military member. So I went to that, and they brought in all the different financial people and so forth. And one of them was the non-prior service recruiter. The in-service recruiter. And he asked me what I was doing. I said, "I'm just going to follow my wife to Ramstein Air Base, and, I'll probably get a contract job there. And, that's about it." He goes, "I got a perfect position for you." I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but sure, I'll listen, because I wasn't opposed to staying in, but I also didn't think I was going to. And so he got me a hold of this Lieutenant Colonel of Reserves who was an Admissions Liaison Officer, primary duty, out of Dubai, Lieutenant Colonel Bill O'Brien, which I'll send to you send this podcast to as well, because I still talk to him. And, if we talk about the small community, I talk to all these guys still. Lieutenant Colonel Bill O'Brien, and he's talking to me, "Hey, this is, I need somebody at Ramstein to do this. Have you ever heard of an Admissions Liaison Officer?" And I was like, "No." And he goes, "Well, we help with the recruiting of the Air Force Academy, Air Force ROTC, and we're really mentors and this and that. We have a great position for you." So I was like, okay, I guess I can think about it. And he sends me all the paperwork, and I fill it out. And one thing led to another, and my hands up, commissioning to reserves, which was really odd because it was so fast. It was like 90 days from the time I talked to him and I had my hand up. And funny story on that was my sister was an intel officer, and I commissioned her into active duty when I was a first lieutenant. And since we were both captains when I went into the reserves, she commissioned me into the reserves. That was really neat. So 2007, I transitioned to the reserves in a category E reserve slot. And then I expected to be here for about 2 years with a contracting job with my wife. And then I ended up getting a contracting job. And a lot of people think, oh, if you do this admissions liaison officer thing, you can't get promoted. But I went from captain to major, which I was shocked at. And then from major to lieutenant colonel, which I was shocked at. And all I've been doing is admission liaison officer work as a primary duty reservist. So that is how my career has progressed. And like I just told you earlier, I just hit 20 years 3 days ago. I've loved every minute of it for more than half my career. My entire job, my primary duty is to mentor young airmen, high school students, and I also mentor squadron commanders and senior leaders on how to get the best and the brightest into the officer corps. So it's been a great experience, and I recommend it to anybody.
There are so many things that I want to circle back on. I mean, we could talk about, you know, your dreams being dashed about going into the band. We could talk about your understanding, despite growing up in a family with some prior military experience, that you thought that you were going in as a private into the Air Force, and how that idea is really the default across our nation, that most people just don't understand the difference between enlisted versus officer, or the Air Force versus the Army, or anything like that. So there's great stuff that we could explore there, the G series orders and what all that entails for officers, how that changes your perspective on what's going on around you and the responsibility that's placed on you. We could talk about reductions in force. There are so many things that we could talk about, but I'm just going to pick one. And I want to focus on this for a little bit, and that's your experience as a Gold Bar recruiter. Just because I see that as being a good lead-in then to what you've been doing as an ALO. So how was it that you learned about the Gold Bar program? What turned your interest on to it? How did you get selected? What was kind of that process like?
So I believe it was my third year of college. An email went out that said, hey, we're looking for 100 of the best and brightest coming out of Air Force ROTC, Air Force Academy, to be the smiling, shining, brightest stars to show prospective high school students what the Air Force ROTC and Air Force Academy were all about. And the rationale was that, you know, you don't want to see a crotchety lieutenant colonel come up and talk to you about how great the military is. You want to see the person that just finished the program to explain how excited they were about joining the program. And if, oh, what did you do this day? And you didn't want to hear back on my day. You wanted to hear, well, I just did this, and this was the Air Force ROTC PT test, and this is why I had to get up early in the morning, and what class you had to take, and those types of things. I was like, well, that's really interesting. That would allow me to stay in Charlottesville for another year. And that was really exciting to me, that I could stay in Charlottetown and not have to take classes and then be a lieutenant. And I would sit in the ROTC detachment as a Gold Bar. And then I traveled around the entire state of Virginia going to major college fairs. We went in and did influence calls to targeted high schools that we wanted to get a better understanding of, and they get a better understanding of how the Air Force ROTC and the Air Force Academy worked. So it was a very, very rewarding experience, and it was a great ground laying for what I do now, because it's the same type of idea, what I do now, except in a broader sense. So the application process back then was you actually had to write an intent letter saying why you wanted to do it, what your background was, what you would bring to the program, and then a full-length picture. They were actually judging you on how you looked in uniform, because you're going to be the front, and you're going to be the standard that they were going to be looking at all these events and so forth. So put that package in. I said, that'd be really cool if I got it. And then I just completely forgot about it until my fourth year. We get our assignments, and my assignment comes down as 33 Sierra Combat Information Officer. But it had this rider on it that said I was going to be a gold bar recruiter for my first year, and my class date for my basic comm officer training was 2001 instead of 2000. And I was like, what the heck? And I was like, oh, right, I applied for that program. So I was pretty excited at that point because I forgot I had applied for it, but I was really excited that I received that assignment to stay and do all those things. And so then what I didn't realize was I was really lucky that I got to stay at my own university, because the original orders had me at Virginia Military Institute. And so they had to amend my orders to put me back at Virginia. And the other two gold bars that came into the state of Virginia, one was from Montana. She was an Air Force Academy lieutenant. And then one was from Philadelphia, and he had gone to Embry-Riddle in Florida. I was really thankful that I got to stay where I was at.
And so then what was your day-to-day like as a gold bar? You talked about how you were going around and talking to people about program things that you did, but how much of that was focused on high schools versus universities there?
It was just, so we were only responsible for high schools.
Okay.
So we would make big blitzes. We would build out schedules for 2-week periods, and they gave us a government car. So we were like, look at us, we're lieutenants, we got our own government car. And so we would drive around and do like 3 or 4 day events in different parts of Virginia and go to the different high schools. And we'd have lists of the high schools that hadn't been hit in a long time. So we would try to build out those in certain counties. And then we'd have the major college fair or high school college fairs that we were required to go to. And we just set up a table, and then we had these lead cards that we'd hand out, and they'd just, ask us about ROTC and commissioning and scholarships and the Air Force Academy and those things. And we would answer questions. And so it wasn't like you're doing the interviews for the academy. We weren't doing the Air Force ROTC scholarships. They wouldn't let us do any of those as lieutenants. We were literally just there to grip and grin and make sure that people understood what we went through. And then there was a captain, the regional director for Virginia at the time. He was the guy that did all the interviews, all the additional things. I mean, we were just there to be the smiley, bright, shiny penny, to be excited and talk to people.
Yeah. Okay. And then from when you started your gold bar program to when you finished, it was full calendar year?
It was about 9 months. And to be honest, by the 9th month, you're ready to get the heck out of there and you started in the Air Force, right? Because you're sitting there, you think it's going to be cool to sit there for a year, but it was ready. It was time to go.
Yeah, you had gone through your commissioning program, gotten all excited about being part of the operational Air Force just to go do recruiting stuff. And so you're anxious, obviously, to go finally be that 33 Sierra / 17 Delta.
That's correct.
All right. Well, thanks for letting me circle back on that. Just wanted to highlight that piece from your career. Again, could talk about so many different things. So let's transition here to
the reason why we're supposed to be here, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So you are an admissions liaison officer. Is that the correct term for ALO?
That's correct. So let me just give you a background on the admission liaison program. So there's the Air Force Academy Admission Liaison Program. Is a program that's designed to help mentor and work with students and airmen to build their packages and educate folks about the Air Force Academy process. We also do all the interviews, and we go around to the different college fairs, and we talk to parents, and we talk to associations and so forth. It has evolved through the years. At one point, there was an admission liaison officer program for ROTC in the 70s and 80s, and they consolidated them together into a single program. And then I don't know the year, but at some point they started allowing Category E reservists to be their primary duty as an admission liaison officer.
So that wasn't always the case. It wasn't a blue certer. It was some civilian volunteer for the position. And
that's correct. Yeah. And so the reason why we have primary duty in the Air Force for this, one of the main reasons is that the Air Force Academy, we require every single applicant that hits candidate status to be interviewed, whereas the Naval Academy and West Point does not. So percentage-wise, we do 100% interviews. Naval Academy and West Point probably do 50%, maybe even less. And to the point where back in the day when I first started, we would sometimes even get called by West Point because they couldn't find somebody to interview. Present day, we have a little less than 300 primary duty admission liaison officers and about 3,000 overall. So you do not have to be primary duty. It does not have to be your full-time Air Force job. It can be active duty, additional duty. You can be reserve additional duty and have another category A, category B job. You can be a civilian that's very excited and interested in the Air Force Academy and Air Force ROTC and join as an additional duty ALO. And you can be military of another service in additional duty but most of those either have a child at the academy or are in an educational position that it would behoove them to know a lot about the academy and help out with the mentorship and so forth for it. So we talked about me being a 17 Delta as my primary career field. When you become a primary duty ALO, your AFSC changes. My AFSC for my duty right now is a 92 Alpha 0. If you look it up, it says general officer, not a general officer. I don't have any stars, but general officer.
Do you get the same pay as a general officer?
I wish, yeah. So it doesn't change. Yeah, all they do is because we don't do our primary career field, they do change our AFSC to 92 Alpha 0. And a lot of times we don't like being called recruiters because you think of a recruiter as somebody that has a quota, has to get a certain amount of people to get on the bus and those type of things. And it's a noble profession and they have to do it, but we don't have any quotas. So we don't care whether or not you get on the bus or not. We want the best, right? We're looking for the quality. We're not looking for the quantity. So if you come back to me as a prospective candidate and you're looking at West Point, you're looking at the Air Force Academy and Naval Academy, you go, hey, sir, sorry to tell you I'm going to the Naval Academy. I don't care because what I'm looking for is I'm looking to get quality American citizens to become leaders in our military. Based on the fact that I said my combat deployment was with the Army, everything's purple. So that's why our job is to get quality individuals into the military. And granted, we're going to be more knowledgeable at the Air Force Academy, Air Force ROTC, but I don't really care if you go in the other military services and so forth. And to be honest, I tell so many kids when we talk to them that when I help them with this process, if at any given time they say, okay, I've decided I'm not interested in the Air Force Academy or Air Force ROTC anymore, I say, that's great. If you still want to talk, if you still want me to go over your resume two more times, everything you've done has developed this whole person concept and a resume of work and a body of work that will help anywhere you want to go. Harvard, Virginia, Utah, BYU, anywhere you want to go, that resume is going to help you. So that's why I tell people, even if you're 30% interested in the Academy or Air Force ROTC, let's still talk, because I will be an academic advisor and mentor for you, whether you end up going to the Air Force Academy or not.
Yeah, that's really good. So if I were to summarize what you're explaining here, what the purpose and mission of the ALO program is for you to be kind of that first initial contact with a prospective military member. Obviously, you're geared towards the Air Force Academy, but you're there to receive them, start answering their questions, and then point them in the right direction, providing mentorship along the way, especially to those that you feel are going to be the highest quality, most viable candidate to join the military.
That's correct. And we also have relationships with the non-prior service recruiters. We have relationships with the professional medical recruiters and lawyers, just the professional recruiters that go into professional stuff. So a lot of times we will get to a point where we will understand that what we're trying to mentor them on is not the right path for them, and they'll understand it as well. And we will help them move to whatever recruiter or mentor that they need to move forward to. And I think that's the beauty of what we do with no quotas. It's all about the evangelism of the Air Force Academy, Air Force ROTC. And to me, it's more officership, the evangelism of officership in the military.
that word right there is actually really apt. The evangelizing of what it is that we do in the military, specifically as officers for the Air Force.
Correct. Yeah, it's a very, very, very rewarding position. Being in it for 12 years, I mean, I have majors in the Air Force now that I've mentored into the program. And so if you add up all the people that I've helped over the years, it's so rewarding walking through the Ramstein BX and a captain walking up to me from aircrew and he goes, "Hey, sir, you remember me?" And I was like, "Holy crap, you went to Aviano High School." He goes, "I really appreciate everything you've done for me. I graduated from the academy. I'm now the assistant crew commander for whatever airframe he's flying." And that's such a rewarding experience. And knowing that you as the ALO have helped and cultivated that relationship through and put that quality person into an officer position is just very rewarding.
Yeah. And this was something that you're clearing up for me that I didn't understand before, is that your focus isn't strictly on the Air Force Academy. You don't exist strictly for the Air Force Academy, but for the Air Force as a whole, or even just the military as a whole. You don't necessarily have a dog in the fight of, we have to get this person into the academy, otherwise I'm failing in my position. No, you're just trying to point these people in the right direction. And if they want to get into the Air Force Academy, then you're better able to facilitate that process for them.
Well, exactly. I mean, our primary focus is to evangelize the Air Force Academy and officership and so forth. So yes, we look for the best and the brightest and introduce them to the officership experience. And then we also say, hey, there's some great opportunities in the Air Force Academy. Hey, there's some great opportunities in Air Force ROTC scholarships. And that really is it. We're not pushing anybody. On our officer performance reports, we are not allowed to put any type of production numbers. And that's duly for the reason that we are not supposed to, or do we want to, try to force anybody into the system, right? So I'm never going to say, hey, Cadet Colin Slade, you need to go to the academy. I'm not really sure about that. No, there's nothing that makes me do that. And then on my OPR, it's not going to say, got 12 people in the Air Force Academy, because what we're looking for is the diversity, and we're looking for the best quality students and airmen to go into the Air Force Academy. So we're looking for quality over quantity.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I love that I'm now better able to understand that side of it, that perspective on it.
And granted, we're also the experts in the academy process, which is very difficult. And that's why they have us, right?
Yeah, let's go that direction. Reed and I have made it no secret over the course of these episodes that we don't know how things work at the academy, which is why we needed so badly to have you on the show. So kind of walk me through, what is the experience of a prospective cadet in working with somebody like you? From looking you up on Google, finding your contact information, or I don't know, how do they find you, to getting all the way through the process to where they've been accepted to the academy? What does that all kind of look like?
Okay, so last year we reorganized the ALO force. If you look at Air Force recruiting services right now, it's split up into 27 recruiting squadrons. 24 of the recruiting squadrons are split into geographically census data. They split the population into 24 equal organizational groups. And then we reorganized, so we have 24 outreach squadron leadership positions. We do not have commanders as caddies. So there's no G series orders so my role right now is I am the 319th outreach squadron lead, and that covers all the states north of New York and Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So it sounds huge, but it's really just 1/24th of the US population. And we work with the 319th Air Force Recruiting Squadron out of Hanscom Air Force Base. And they do the same thing we do for the non-prior service. I've heard you talk about how the OTS recruiter always isn't the one right down the street from you. And so each one of those 24 recruiting squadrons has an OTS piece to it. I mentioned that there's 27 recruiting squadrons. There's 24 that are geographical. There's 2 that do professional. So that would be, doctor, lawyer, clergy, nurse, some weird things like architect in the medical field and some things like that. And then 1 just to deal with special ops because of our requirement to get so many special operators into the Air Force. They've got a specialized recruiting squadron just for that purpose. And the reason why we reorged into that organization is because we're trying to establish a total force recruiting structure. And what that entails is we're trying to go into different events and different organizations and so forth and be able to, if a student or an airman comes up to us and asks, I'd like to get in the Air Force, that we can address any way to get in the Air Force possible at that booth or in that situation. So be it A1, general service, civilian, enlisted, officer, special forces, professional officer, reserve, National Guard, right? All those things, anything across the gamut we can address and we can point them in the right direction. So we're still working on getting that education out to the force at the moment where, we send ALOs representatives to the recruiting services tech school. So there we have ALOs down there that present to them. And, we do a reciprocal thing where they come up to our ALO training at the academy. And then the gold bars come in and we do presentations to them as well for ROTC. We've also started as the Air Force Academy putting first year lieutenants, which is similar to the gold bar program, but instead we field them out to the different recruiting squadrons. So we've got, this past year we had 10 and we put them in 10 specific regions that we're targeting for our diversity mission to try to get the diverse population in the Air Force Academy. So they sit and they work in tandem with the regional directors from the Air Force, ROTC, and with the regional directors for Air Force Academy. We're starting to field out our active duty regional directors into 3 distinct regions. So you take those 24 areas around the U.S. In each of those areas, you take 8, and that creates a region, a directorate. And so now we've got, instead of all the regional directors sitting at the academy, we're actually fielding them at the different locations around the U.S. And the impetus of this was there was a picture at a college fair up in the Northeast where we had 5 different Air Force booths at $2,000 to $3,000 a piece. And whoever the first booth was, they were all going up to that booth and they were saying, hey, I'm interested in the Air Force. And when they really didn't want to do what that booth was doing, whatever booth that was, they just kept walking by the other ones, even though they should have really talked to the rest of them because it was different pieces and different functions with the Air Force at the time. So they look at that and they say, look, we got 2 times 5. So you have $10,000. We can drop down to $2,000 for that ability to put a booth there and give you the total force idea of what you could possibly do in the military. Because that gives you anybody, if you're handicapped, whatever ethnic origin are, whatever diversity origin you are, or whatever socioeconomic stuff you have going along, anything can be addressed at that one booth. Because when I was a gold bar, somebody comes up and go, I want to fix planes. And I go, do you want to go to college first? No, I just want to fix planes. That's all I want to do. Well, that's very simple. He wants to enlist. He doesn't want to go to college. He wants to go fix planes. And I go, well, you need to go talk to that guy 3 booths down all the way to the far end. And he stares at me and goes, aren't you the Air Force? Right. And so because we had 2 booths, we had the officer booth and we had the enlisted booth not sitting next to each other, it was very confusing to those kids. So we're trying to avoid that, and we're trying to not miss people that come up to the wrong booth and not get the right information.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. It was one of my biggest frustrations as a recruiting officer for ROTC is showing up to a recruiting event and the Air Force is already here. Okay, all right. Well, I'll go see what's up with that. And it's either the reserve recruiter or the active duty enlisted recruiter, or
it could be the ALO. It could be ALO getting points.
it was the ALO a couple of times. And as well as talking to people who are interested in the Air Force and not being able to quickly pass them off to somebody else who is able to better meet their need for what it was that they were wanting to do. As you mentioned, maybe that person just really does not want to go to college, or is just wanting to do a particular career path that officers just don't do. And at that point, I need to be able to turn them over to an enlisted recruiter, or talking with somebody who is super motivated, loves the Air Force, and then they let me know that they're type 1 diabetic. Well, I'm like, well, I can't help you because you're not going to qualify through DODMERB, for an officer position. You're not going to qualify through MEPS for an enlisted position, but they could still serve in a civilian capacity. But I didn't have anybody that I could pass them off to start answering those questions and capture their interest and their talent.
Yep. Nowadays, when we have these total force recruiting events, if somebody says I have type 1 diabetes, and well, you're not going to qualify, unfortunately, for military service. Well, here's so and so from A1 who's going to talk about the Palace Acquire program right out of college. And so that's what we do now. So I think it's a tremendous pivot where we don't have so many different people flying around trying to recruit just their functional area within the Air Force ecosystem. And we can then attract as many people as possible and then fit them into the right bucket that they need to talk to. And that person's there, or even me get smart enough that I can field the question to a level that I can then give them the information if that person's not there. And that's what we're really trying to get to in the recruiting systems right now, and the recruiting in the Air Force.
Yeah, finally somebody got smart about it and realized that we need to look at recruiting from the perspective of the people coming in who have no clue what the different things are, what the different options are. They just don't know.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like, I thought I was going to be a private, right? So there you go.
Yeah. So the way that people are going to find you, specifically the ALO, is at these recruiting events. Either they're going to talk to an ALO directly, or they'll find that Air Force booth, and from there they'll be able to be put in touch with you.
Right. If you go to academyadmissions.com, that is the admission process for the Air Force Academy. That's where you get the application. That's where you start the process. That's where you get the information to contact the academy, and the academy will then connect you with the ALO that's closest to you within your region. Or they can call me too. So I can give you my information, and then they can write to me and then do that.
Yeah. So the way things are set up now, whether it's through the website or at a recruiting event or through this podcast, however anybody gets in touch with big Air Force, whatever that is, it's now structured in such a way that we can quickly connect you with your geographically assigned ALO.
That's correct. Yes. And then OSLs, the Outreach Squadron Leads. So I have probably 15 to 16 primary duty ALOs that work for me, and then a large amount of additional duty, probably about 100 across the different things I told you about earlier. And then each functional state or functional area within our area, we also have an assignment coordinator, and that ALO is responsible for those subsets of the overall area. So for instance, if you called me and said, hey, I have a son or daughter in Nashua, New Hampshire, I would get you a hold of my area coordinator, assignment coordinator sitting in New Hampshire to help you. And then that person will then get you the assigned ALO that covers that high school. So, I mean, we get that granular in the high schools and so forth, and who's going to cover each individual piece like that.
Okay, that's good. So once they've gotten in touch with you, continue the process. What is it like to get from first contact through the application process to where they've been accepted to the academy?
Right. So I would say 70% of applicants out of high school don't contact an ALO first. They just go to academyadmissions.com and they start the application process. And their first interaction with an ALO is when they say, you need to have an interview with your admissions liaison officer. And they go, oh, there's an admission liaison officer. And so then that's when the admission liaison officer, because we are contacted through an automated system that I have to do a candidate interview with candidate Colin Slade. And then I will contact you, or you contact me, and we set up a time to do a virtual one. And it's officially virtual. So we have to do it like what we're doing right now over a Zoom. And then I do a write-up, and that goes into your record for when they do the selection process at the Air Force Academy. And then there's also the other one. So like when you first apply, so if Kennedy Collins says, I'm applying, you don't know what an ALO is, and you don't really care, it still will show up on a list and get assigned a mentor ALO. So if you get assigned to me as a mentor ALO, I will reach out. A lot of kids will just ignore us at that stage because they don't really need us, or they're in a certain situation where they don't need us or whatever. But we will continue to reach out and try to help you within the process. And if you don't want to respond, that's fine. We're there to help you. But the 30% that do engage with us, and I'll give you my personal way of dealing with it, because every ALO is a little different, and they're all very good ALOs. It's just we all have our own little personal nuances to how we do it. I will sit you down for the first time as either an airman going through the Leadership Enabling Airman Development, which is the LEAD program, which is how you go from airman to the Air Force Academy, or if you're a student, we first go over your grades, what your SAT, ACT scores are, because no matter how good you are and how well you're doing, I mean, those are very important pieces to the process. And if you don't have specific grades, because it's, lower than 25% on the admissions rates to the academy. So we have to be very honest with people about whether or not you're going to be competitive to get into the academy. And if they're not, then, we mentor them on different ways of either moving those up or the different avenues to become an officer if that's what they want to do. And so that's the first vetting process. We talk about that. We talk about the whole person concept. So I ask every student or airman to send me a student or airman resume. And I've been doing it long enough where I can just look at that resume for about 30 seconds. I can tell you where your holes are. I can tell you where the board is going to say, look, you're lacking in this or this or this. And then at that point, I get the second meeting I have with them, I go through that resume and I give them pointers on how to make that resume better. If I think that those scores that they have are going to be competitive, they're going to be competitive in a slot at the Air Force Academy. So, and in those situations, I will say, look, they're looking for diversity. And I think a lot of people get in this weird diversity argument where they think it's just ethnicity, and it's not just ethnicity. They're looking for socioeconomic stuff, such as first college student. They're looking for the low income. So a lot of times you'll see that the ones that are advantaged are the ones that have, in higher end middle class neighborhoods or higher end neighborhoods. We're looking for the low income diversity population as well, because they bring a lot of experiences that, will make our Air Force a better place. So bringing those into the mix as well. And so we're looking for all those things, and we kind of target those type of folks to try to help to get through the process. And it's not that we ignore everybody else, but everybody else normally has a great support system and a great way of helping them through the whole process to get in anyway. And so we're more of an augmentation to their great support system, where we're trying to really target and help folks that don't have a great support system to get into the academy as well. We found that a lot of the diversity categories that we look at, if we can help them more through the process, that they're going to be less likely to abandon and continue through the process to try to get in the Air Force Academy. And that's the same problem with regular universities too, high-end universities and so forth, getting those diversity categories. It's not that other categories aren't important, but the diverse categories, if you don't give them that additional help to get through the process, because it gets confusing, that they don't finish the process and then you lose that diverse perspective and that idea. The Department of Defense issues guidelines on applicant pools to the 3 academies, and they said these are the guidelines on where we're trying to target the amount of diversity within the pools. And what some people look at that as, you're quoting how many of each of these diversity categories you're supposed to have in the academies. It's not. It's the pools. They just want enough qualified candidates in each of these pools competing for these slots. And it may not be that those percentages are what actually assess into the academy, but they just want those pools to show that, look, we're getting the best and brightest across all these diverse categories and the cross section of the United States, that we just don't want a homogeneous force. We just want as much diversity as possible.
Okay. What are some of the other things that you're looking for high quality candidates?
We look for motivation. There's so many folks that have really, really good on paper resumes that don't contact us, and it ends up being their father or their mother that contact us consistently. And I'm sure you have the same thing in ROTC for the scholarship stuff. And so you have to be motivated and you have to want to contact us. And again, this is me, and I mentor this to my ALOs that come in and work for me, is if the student or the airman is not the one that is consistently contacting you, and it's either the supervisor / commander or the parent, you never hear from the student, stop talking to the supervisor or the commander or the parent. And I just tell them, I'm very, very direct with the parent. I say, hi, sir. Hi, ma'am. Thank you for reaching out. I appreciate everything you're asking. And the first call I will take and I will answer any question they got. The second call, I was like, thank you. From this point on, I will only respond to emails and phone calls from the applicant. You're more than welcome to coming with the applicant to any meeting or anything, but part of the evaluation process is show initiative and excitement in the process. So that is one of the major things I look for over the 13 years is motivation. If I do not see the motivation in the candidate, I try to stop the process, because we don't want those people coming to the academy. We don't want those people going into ROTC, because the taxpayer money that we pay to get them to those different commissioning sources is wasted on them, because they will drop out. And so if you're listening to this and you want to go to the Air Force ROTC scholarship route, or you want to do the Air Force Academy route as an airman or as a student going to college first, you need to show motivation. You need to show initiative, because we are looking at you as soon as you contact us and evaluating you for your enthusiasm on top of your leadership potential.
Yeah, absolutely. Reed often talks about those who get into OTS are the ones who make some sort of significant sacrifice in order to get there across the board. They have to go out and get it themselves. And the same is true here. Yes, it is quote unquote easier to get a commission through ROTC or maybe even the Air Force Academy, but you still have to be motivated. Your parents can't do this for you. You have to go out and get it yourself.
Right. That's a true statement. I mean, I've had interviews when I was a young ALO, which I didn't understand what I was really doing as well as I do now, where we're doing this, where we're in like a Zoom or a Skype session, and you can see my hand. Nobody on the podcast is going to see that, but the mom is sitting right here.
Yeah.
And you can tell the mom is sitting right here, right outside of you of the screen, and you can see the student's eyes going back and forth to the mom. You know, you've heard the term helicopter mom, right? Well, the new term that has been going around is snowplow moms or snowplow parents, because a helicopter mom helicopters around trying to help you out. Snowplow moms just get in front of the kid and just push everything out of the way, and they run the process. So we're trying to get rid of that. In that situation, I actually said, "Is your mom sitting next to you?" And he kept looking at her, and I was like, "Come on, if you're trying to tell me she's not there, your mom?" And no, she's not. I was like, "You need to tell your mom to leave." And so she pretended to leave, and she sat back down because I could still hear her whispering to him. In that situation, the mom was running it, and the write-up reflected that. So that's what I'm saying. You have to be motivated. We don't want those cadets in either Air Force ROTC or the Air Force Academy that have that type of influence. We want the fully vested, fully motivated one that will take the initiative, because as an officership, we talk about initiative, right? You need to be able to decide and take initiative, make a decision, and move forward with it. You have in a lot of situations, like when I was at RAF Groton, right? If anything had happened those 2 days, I had no idea. I'm not going to call my mom. I'm the officer. I was the one in charge at that time. So you need to have that initiative, and that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Wholeheartedly agree. And I'm really glad that you brought that one up. Anything else that you're looking for?
Yeah, the whole person concept. I mean, we're looking at, so a lot of people say, oh, I don't have a lot of leadership, meaning official leadership. And so what I run into a lot over here in Germany and in Europe is that you have a lot of military dependents that have gone to 2 high schools or 3 high schools. And what I tell them is, like, I don't have a lot of leadership, and I wasn't the captain of my football team. I wasn't this and that. I was like, official leadership is one thing, but official leadership is not everything. You can show unofficial leadership in everything you do. And so what I give them as examples is, for instance, let's say Colin and Brian are sitting at a park and we have a couple other friends there and we're like, man, this place is a mess. And you and I say, let's go, hey, everybody go home, get a plastic bag, let's clean this place up. And so we go back, plastic bags cleaned up. The student that does that a lot of times doesn't even think that that's important. They just did it. But that's very important, right? And so I tell them to say, okay, so you've been to 3 high schools in 4 years. You need to talk to your mom. You need to talk to your dad. You need to talk to your best friend. You need to talk to if you're on the football team, call your old football coach. Talk to your sister. Talk to your grandparents, anybody that knows you, and have them give you examples of where they've seen leadership potential from you. That one where you have gone and cleaned up that park, what does that show about your personality? It shows initiative. It shows delegation, because you just had all your friends go back and do it. It shows community service. It shows leadership. It shows integrity, because, no one asked you to do it, and you're doing it for no other reason other than to clean up the park. So I've just showed you 5 things. That thing took you 2 hours. I've showed 5 leadership attributes. I've even told kids to go do that because they've had 4 high schools in 4 years, right? Look, you need to go out, go just do some community service projects on your own, because that'll show the leadership potential that I'm looking for, right? Because the captain of the football team or the president of the student council, yeah, they could be amazing people and they can do amazing things. But we all know that can also be a popularity contest. They may do absolutely nothing. You may be just a member of the student council. You may run everything. You may have just led all 5 major projects that year, and you're not the president or the vice president or the secretary or the treasurer. You just happen to be the most competent person that has the most leadership potential in that whole bunch. And the president was just the most attractive guy that was the football captain and the quarterback, right? So he's not doing anything. He just wants to put on his resume. He's like, oh man, we got to do that fundraiser. Colin, you go do that fundraiser. And then you're the one that really is running the student council at that point. So that's why I tell everybody, you've done so many things that show leadership potential that you take for granted because you're just a good person and you have that leadership potential. And people that have really good leadership potential don't know they have it. And then if somebody comes to me, the younger you are, the better when you talk to me, because like if you're a freshman or even in 8th grade, a lieutenant that just graduated out of the academy that came to me in 7th grade, she called me out of the blue and she goes, hi, I'm interested in the academy. I really want to go. So I was like, oh, okay, no problem. What are you, a sophomore or junior? She goes, 7th grade. And I'm like, holy, what are you talking about? And I was like, all right, I'll meet with you. And so she shows up for her first meeting, not with her parents. She had come by herself. She sits down, shakes my hand, and puts out this piece of paper. She goes, all right, I've developed a checklist for every year on how I get the Air Force Academy. And I was like, are you kidding me? No one does this, right? And so she had a list from 7th grade every year on what she needed to do to reach her dream of going to the Air Force Academy. So I was like, holy crap. And I was like, well, I mean, what is your dream in life? I mean, you want to be the first female general in whatever career field? She goes, no, I want to be an ambassador. And I'm like, holy crap, you're in 7th grade, right? And so that first meeting, I said, okay, here's what you do. You need to write a student resume out. And then every 3 months, write down what you've done that shows leadership. And so she did. Every 3 months, she would write down. And so that's what I tell other kids and airmen. I was like, you need, like, if they're in 9th grade, start a student resume. I don't care what the format is. And people spend so much time on the format and where it goes and stuff. I was like, stream of conscience. Just write everything you can think about. I don't care if there's, because I'm not judging you on that yet. You can do that later. Just write everything down. The worst thing in the world is I don't see something. I can delete it and say it's not important, but I can't add it because I don't know it happened. So just write everything down. I don't care what you've done, and we can delete it later. And so hers was probably 9 pages by the time we started her application. So then we just pared it down into what needed to be in the application. And there were so many things in there that you could read that if we hadn't started that when she was in 7th grade, she would not have remembered that she did. And they were amazing things, but because she was an amazing individual, like most people that are striving to become officers in the U.S. military, because she was an amazing individual, she took for granted a lot of things. And I was like, look, this is important. She's like, yeah, I never would have left that in there if we hadn't written it down, because she never would have written it down in the first place. Because by the time you're a junior, you and I would be sitting there and go, what do we do? And all we would think about is the official leadership positions that we've had. So that unofficial leadership is so important, especially if you move around a lot. And maybe you're homeschooled, right? Homeschooling is very difficult to get into any academy and stuff because of all that whole person concept stuff, the sports teams and the additional extracurricular activities and so forth. So writing that list is so important. So those are the two things: initiative, making sure you're the one driving your application and your mentorship with me, and then unofficial leadership potential, writing all that stuff down, keeping a living list, a document of what you're doing from the time you start to when you're applying. Because with the Air Force Academy, you actually have to submit a student resume. Guess what? We just wrote that together. Now, why is that important? Is because another piece of that is my interview. So let's say I've been interviewing this candidate. Well, now her record will get transferred to you and you're doing the interview. So that's how we do it. We take a mentor ALO and then you get reassigned to an evaluator ALO that does your actual application. So they've got no preconceived notions, there's no biases, there's nothing. So now you're going to do that interview and then you only have 9 lines. That's why I recommend working with your ALO on that student resume, because that's really an extension of that ALO interview now that does between the line stuff.
Okay, very good. So once you have identified somebody who meets all of these criteria, what is it that gets them to the actual finalized application and accepted into the academy?
So the most unique thing about applying to any academy is you have to get the nomination. So one thing that a lot of folks do not understand when they think about applications to any of the academies is that when you see that percentage of how many people get in the academy, percentage-wise, that percentage is not, they take the 9,000 to 10,000 applicants and they take the top 18%. Based on Title 10 requirements, they have to take a broad swath of the U.S. population, which is the nominations. And so you have different nomination sources that you can get into the academy. And those include your 2 senators, your congressman, the president, the vice president, the governor of, if you live in a territory like the Virgin Islands or Puerto Rico. If you're in JRTC and you're a distinguished unit, your JRTC instructor can give you a nomination. And then as an airman, you can get one from your squadron commander through the LEAD program. Okay. So I do want to correct one of your prior podcasts. They were talking about the presidential nomination. The presidential nomination has nothing to do with what he was talking about. They do have nomination sources for if your parent was a Medal of Honor winner, if your parent was killed in the line of duty. They're special. They're a very special and very unique subset of nominations that you can get for that. And so almost nobody you ever talk to is going to have one of those because they're very unique, right? The presidential nomination is for anyone who has a military parent who's had 8 years of good service. That's it. So I always equate this to the alumni bump, right? So I don't know how your college was, but at Virginia, the alumni bump was if your mother or father was an alumni, you'd be considered for an in-state pool as opposed to out-of-state pool if you were an out-of-state thing, right? So this allows you as an alumni of the Air Force or any military service for your children to have an additional source of nomination. And so there's 100 slots at the academy for that presidential thing. That's what that is. So that's the most important piece you need to look at when you first start the application process. The application process starts on March 1st of your junior year. And the first things you got to do, the March 1st of your junior year, and even before that, is look up your 2 senators and your congressman's website, either at house.gov for your congressman and senate.gov for your 2 senators, and look at their schedule for how to get an academy nomination. And so that's the first thing you do on March 1st. And then you go to academyadmissions.com. You start putting all your application in based on all the information in it. Then around July 1st, they wait for the current class to go in. And then they start flipping applicants to candidate status if they perceive you being competitive. At that point, your application opens and you'll have an entire list of things you have to accomplish to complete your candidate application. And that includes things like submit your senior class record, SAT, ACT scores officially, your transcript. 3 teachers have to write recommendation letters officially. You have to take your cadet fitness assessment, all these different things, right? And so we help you with that process to the point where sometimes we'll even proctor this cadet fitness assessment for you. And then as a candidate, about halfway through that process is when the DODMERB physical starts. And they gate that so that because of the cost of that, they wait till you get about 50% through your application process before they allow you to go through that, because that shows that you are motivated to finish out the application. So you want to try to get that DODMERB done as fast as possible, because that idea of whether or not you're going to be cleared by DODMERB has nothing to do with whether or not you get selected. So it's happened where you get selected for the academy and then you get disqualified the day after you get your appointment because DODMERB gets cleared the next day and you're not cleared. So we help you through that whole process other than DODMERB, because we're not medical professionals, so we can't answer any of the questions for the medical stuff. And then the only other weird one would be is if you're a blue chip athlete. Since it's an NCAA school, we're under NCAA recruiting rules. So we'll send you to gofalcons.com, which is the athletic website, and you can directly send your huddle or your information that you want to talk to that individual coach, and they will work on whatever recruiting they want to do with you directly. But ALOs do not get involved in that. You still have an ALO as a blue chip athlete, but they're really just there for the administrative parts of, when you get through the process. Anything about sports, we're not allowed to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Obviously, there's so much that we could talk about. We have been for a while now, but let's bring this to a close. First of all, if there is someone who wants to get in touch with you directly, obviously they can talk to any ALO and they're going to get the information that they need. But if they want to talk to you directly, what's the best way for someone to get in touch with you?
Right. They can use my military address, brian.zajick.1@us.af.mil. But really, depending on the region, you can send that email to me, or you can go to academyadmissions.com and send an email to the academy direct, and they will make sure that you get to the right region. If you send it to me, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send it to my counterpart in what region of the country that you're actually applying through, and they're all very confident. We get together, all the OSLs get together every year. So anybody I send you to, I will wholeheartedly recommend, because we work together a lot in different things. So.
Yeah, and we'll definitely link all the contact information, websites, and everything that we've talked about in the show notes so that everybody will have access to that information there. One final question for you, since you've binged a few episodes, you know this is coming. What does it mean to be an officer?
Man, I've heard you say this, and then I didn't think about it. And I've listened to them, and they all have great answers. That's the problem. So what is it to be an officer? It's not about directing. It's about promoting and protecting and enabling and making sure the folks in your organization are successful, and to make sure that you're not only creating a good organization for the near term, that you're creating a great Air Force for the future. Because what happens when all those folks PCS, you're just cross-pollinating your vision and how you're a leader to every other organization as you move forward. So yeah, I really think it's more about making sure you've pollinated good leadership and good ideals into your folks to pollinate it out and create that. It's like the coaching pyramids in basketball, right? They go, look, Bob Knight, look at his coaching pyramid, how great all those folks did. All his assistant coaches went on to do great things in the NCAA. That's how I see that. If you're not instilling those values and stuff into everybody that you're leading, and that leadership then pollinates out to everybody else, then you're not being a good leader.
Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Zajick.
Perfect.
Awesome. I got it.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, and we look forward to further conversations in the future.
Yep, no problem. And I appreciate you inviting us on. I like what you're doing here because I'm such a huge podcast person. So when I saw this come in, I was like, man, this is like right down my alley that we've got this podcast for Air Force commissioning. So I appreciate everything you do. I appreciate what your partner's doing on this. And I hope that this helps even one person become commissioned. I'd be very happy. So I hope it helps a lot of people, but even one person, you've successfully done your job. So I thank you for your service, and I thank you for everything you're doing.
So as we were saying in the introduction to this episode, holy shnikes, there was a lot of information there.
Absolutely. And like you said, so much of it isn't just applicable to the USAFA application process. These are things that you can apply irrespective of your session source and irrespective of where you are as an officer. There's a lot of really good information and developmental knowledge that he laid out for us.
Oh, absolutely. So much of what he talks about for what they are looking for in candidates to go to USAFA, those are the same things, those are the same principles that continue to apply throughout the officer's career. And recognizing that there are opportunities to lead and responsibilities to lead in so many different situations. And to put it in context of the conversation with Brian, that he talked about getting letters of recommendation, right? I had never heard this before, but I think is brilliant that you shouldn't get those different LORs from the highest possible ranking people that you can think of, because in reality, those people are going to view you in a very similar way. Plus, you're probably going to behave in a very similar way with all of them, even though they may be in different contexts or parts of your life. Even so, you're going to behave the same in with all of those people. But that's not what the academy wants. They want to see a breadth of experiences, a breadth of leadership, and your ability to lead in multiple different situations. And I just think that's such a brilliant idea, and kind of speaks to the importance of officers being able to be leaders and be dynamic in lots of different situations. But I'm curious, Reed, what you think about the idea of being a different person in different situations versus being the same person in all situations. Do you see how there's kind of like a tug of war between those two different ideas?
Yeah, totally. And I remember listening to that specific portion of the interview, and the first question I had for myself is, am I different with different people? I mean, different people relative to my power and influence over them. For example, let's remove it from the military structure so we can apply it a little bit more broadly, right? So I view my relationship with my wife much like a complete peer. We are absolute equals. We are a team. Do I speak to her? Do I behave toward her differently than I do my children, who I have more power and influence over the way they live their lives? Do I treat my boss differently than I treat my spouse? Obviously, I'm closer to my spouse than I am to my boss. But what I'm getting at is, do I treat them with the same amount of respect? Do I listen to them in the same way? Do I talk to them in the same way? And it really made me wonder. And I think the leaders that I have respected the most, I think, had a smaller difference in their way they behaved towards their bosses, their peers, and the people that fell underneath them. What are your thoughts on that?
So when I was in ROTC as an instructor there, I talked quite a bit to the cadets about the full range leadership model and the importance of being able to view that range of leadership abilities as a toolkit, that there was not one specific type, management by exception versus contingent reward versus transformational leadership or anything like that. There wasn't one that was the right tool for all situations, but that you need to be that dynamic leader who is able to use all the tools in your tool set at the right and appropriate time. Because there are going to be situations where there's just not time or even just the need for you to be that inspirational, motivational leader who's standing in front of all your people or a peer group, or even practicing some up leadership toward a group commander or wing commander or something like that. Sometimes that's not the thing that needs to happen. Sometimes you just need to more briefly address a situation, and that would be more of like a contingent reward or management by exception sort of thing, right? But the thing that I emphasize to them is that your principles remain constant in all of those different situations. The actual way that you employ the tool, the words that you speak, or the exact directive that you might give or conversation that you have, those are going to look different, but you can still be the same person. You can still exude the same principles and the same characteristics in all situations. And I think what Brian is getting at here is that you want to show that your principles are concrete and remain the same in all situations, whether it's the peer group or a group of subordinates or practicing that up leadership. That from all of those different perspectives, they are all saying the same thing, which is that you are a leader, that you are able to be someone who will influence and help others to accomplish the mission, whatever that is. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, absolutely does. And I'm glad you were able to highlight that for the audience. I kind of picked up on a slightly different flavor of what you were talking about, the different tools of leadership. And I did the exact same thing for those lessons, Colin. We talked about it like a toolbox, and you had to develop, every problem does not a hammer require, right? You have to pick the right tool for the job. I like how he describes the gap between what a lot of civilians think about as leadership and what we are needing as leadership in the Air Force, and how that was one of the biggest things he had to do, is help people identify times and situations where they were leading people and they were being a leader and pointing that out for others. And I really liked how he brought that in and discussed it with us, because I, like him, didn't even know officers were a thing. In his introduction, he talks about how he wanted to join and he wanted to be in the band. And when he went to ROTC, he thought he was going to be a private and go to basic training and then like enlist, and then you could make it all the way up to colonel. I was in that same exact place. My dad was an enlisted airman. I thought that's just what you did. I did not know that there was this entire separate division that is the Commissioned Officer Corps. I had no idea that was a thing. So I really related to him. And I thought he did a really good job of highlighting what leadership actually is, because I think there's a pretty big gap. Leadership is not a position, it's not a title. Leadership is a way of being, and I think he did a really good job of describing that.
Yeah, definitely. There is this knowledge gap, and I'm curious, what is the source of that knowledge gap? Why is it that in the civilian world, but even it continues in the military, that we view leadership as position, as rank, and we struggle to accept the fact that leadership, to be a leader, is influencing other people to do something that they wouldn't normally do on their own. That is leadership. And that has nothing to do with a position or a rank. So what is the source of that misunderstanding? Why does this gap continue to exist?
This makes me think back to the power versus authority lesson. I think because with rank comes power and authority. Now, there are different types of power and authority, right? There is expert power, for example. You can be the youngest person in the room and have expert power over the 4-star. If the 4-star general needs to get his email on his phone and he can't figure it out and he calls comm and they send a 2-striper in, who has expert power right now? Right? The 2-striper in the room who knows how to fix the phone. That is power. And there's different ways that power and authority exist. And I think because position and rank is tied to the amount of power that you legally have, that's another source of power, right? Legal power. I think that's one of the biggest sources within the Air Force. And externally, I think that's something that we should probably explore, a little bit more in depth for another time. The civilian military divide. I know that maybe, in our second year, that's one of those thought pieces that we want to explore a little bit more. But he mentioned that his father was enlisted, and yet he had no idea how this all worked, right? My dad was the same. And I remember my dad wearing the uniform. So I don't even have the excuse that, oh, my dad got out before I was, 2 years old or something. I don't even have that excuse. I distinctly remember my dad getting ready in the morning, my mom holding a lighter up, to get all the cables off and stuff. Like, I remember this. And so I don't have that excuse. So I think it's because it's a different thing. I think it's a whole separate class of people. The warrior caste is different. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons there is this big civilian military divide, and something that we are trying to address. That's one of the reasons we have this podcast. It's helped to try to close that gap a little bit. I think Colonel Zajick did a great job of highlighting a lot of ways in which he has to overcome that for his applicants and the family members that are supporting the applicants.
Yeah. I think something that can go a long way to addressing that is he talks about starting early to capture those leadership things that on a regular basis that you should be writing down the things that you do that can qualify as leadership. That anytime you are influencing people to accomplish some sort of goal that they wouldn't do otherwise on their own, that's leadership, and you should write that down. Going to clean up the park, volunteering your time at the Boys and Girls Club, or maybe some other like church organization, or helping with some sort of school project. All of these things can qualify as leadership so long as you are taking the initiative to influence those people in some way. And you should write all that down and capture it starting early in your career, even before you ever put a uniform on, so that you can get after this gap and help, and then share that information with other people around you. Don't live in a silo and not talk about it. And I think by doing that, you can start to address this misunderstanding about what leadership is.
Yeah, totally agree.
And that then gets to another point that I think we should discuss, Reed, is the importance of you sharing your leadership with other people.
Colonel Zajic called it a leadership pyramid. Right at the end of his time with us, he referenced famous basketball coach Bobby Knight and how he had established what he called the leadership pyramid. Basically, any coach that he had worked with went on to do great things as a coach, who then coached other coaches who went on to do great things as coaches, right? He had left this legacy of building amazing coaches. And I think you could apply the same thing to Bill Belichick with the New England Patriots. You could apply the same thing to Nick Saban, currently at Alabama. So one of the preeminent responsibilities of a leader is to build other leaders. And he was doing that for us, Colin, right? Right as he's like teaching what leadership actually looks like, I'm learning, realizing that I need to share that with others so that, so that they can influence others and build the leadership pyramid. And what I wanted to talk about here is, are we doing this as a service? Are we actually measuring if you are building leaders. And on the flip side, if you are stratifying somebody, if you are pushing somebody for promotion and it turns out they're a dirtbag, are we holding you accountable? And right now, I don't think the answer is yes. Now, I don't know what happens when all the generals get together at their big fancy gatherings. Do they point out at each other and say, hey, I know you selected that person for squadron command. Well, they're a dirtbag. And now you're not going to get your second star. Like, I have no idea if that conversation happens. It certainly isn't transparent to us. And I don't know how we could institute that, but I would really like to talk about how we could have some sort of feedback mechanism that holds leaders accountable for the kind of leaders they're building.
Yeah, you're bringing up such an important point about the responsibility of leaders to create more leaders. And if you're not doing that, or if the leaders that you are creating are not becoming the kind of leaders that the Air Force needs, there needs to be some sort of feedback loop, or I don't want to say repercussion, I don't want to say punishment, but it needs to be understood and transparent, at least on a larger basis than it is right now, that the kind of leaders that you created, that they are succeeding or that they are failing in being leaders themselves.
Yeah, it's really tricky problem because as I thought about it, I listened to the interview. I loved how he brought that up. And then I started thinking about how you could institute this. And I could start to see some negative behaviors being incentivized. So what do I mean by that? So if you as an officer know that every single time you write an evaluation on another officer or an enlisted member, that you are forever tied to that evaluation and it's being accounted for. And if that person screws up in the future, you're going to be, like you said, there will be negative repercussions. I worry that would create a very safe behavior. You're not going to push the firebrand, the hard charger, the innovator for those top strats because there's the potential that they could, rub somebody the wrong way and then flame out. And that's your fault. Hey, former squadron commander, you pushed this person and nobody likes them, and that's your fault. I also don't know how to remove personal accountability from that type of feedback mechanism, right? That's something that I've learned no matter how hard I try. And maybe this is just a straight up failure of leadership, but at some point that individual is going to make their own choice. And they could have had the exact same leadership that everybody else got, but they still chose a path that was not good. So I don't know how we account for that individual choice in this type of system where there's some sort of feedback attached. I am not smart enough to know that there's an answer to this problem. And maybe this would be a really great thing to discuss in the Heritage Room, get some conversation going. I know, for example, the United States Navy has a really tight accounting system with respect to keeping track and accounting for who you push for promotion and command and that sort of thing. But I loved the idea that you are leaving a legacy behind you. We should probably take a look at that. I was very intrigued by that concept.
Yeah. It makes me wonder where in the world, in the military, you mentioned the Navy, maybe in the business world, yeah, out in the civilian industries, where this is being done properly and effectively. And like you, I don't know, but maybe we have some members of our audience who do know, and we would welcome you to share that with us. Like you said, Reed, we can discuss that in the Heritage Room. You can send us an email to airforceofficerpodcast@gmail.com. Engage with us through social media. Help us to better understand, where is this being done correctly? Where are we capturing that legacy in such a way that it doesn't breed that risk aversion that you talked about, and that it's encouraging leaders to build more leaders in such a way that they continue to be effective and successful and help the Air Force or whatever organization continue to be more successful and effective as a whole.
Yeah, looking forward to hearing what the audience has to offer.
Again, thank you to Lieutenant Colonel Brian Zajick for taking the time to share his knowledge with us and encouraging this level of discussion. This is definitely one of those episodes that you're going to want to go back and listen to on multiple occasions so that you can pull out these types of lessons and have even deeper discussions about them with your peer group, within your leadership structures, and definitely within the Heritage Room with the rest of us.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to this week's episode.